finishing up. He's turning 84 years young on Tuesday. And he said, that's it. So, I've asked Michael if he would to sort of take on part of the responsibilities of being our administrator, working in that area and the responsibility of his ministry. And treasurer, we're still working on that part. So let's keep all these folks in our prayers, if you will, please. But Sam's done a tremendous job. I think they're down in Atlanta. He and Barbara are down in Atlanta this week with their family there, so they'll be back this week. Just keep him in your prayers. He has done a tremendous job, and we're going to miss him around the office up here. Also, this morning early, I called Michael about 6 o'clock, and he says, well, he went outside barefooted. I said, dude, what? He said, I'm barefooted, and it's icy out here. But then I called Brother Eric right after that, and he checked everything out, and we said, well, we'll just try our best to be here, and I'm so glad you made it. I did have a phone call or two while we were in the office earlier this morning. Some of our folks couldn't make it. One of the ladies called and says, my back deck is absolutely covered in ice, and if you fall, it hurts, and I'm not going to try to be there this morning. So we understand that, but we're glad you made it. And I hope you'll be back tonight. Brother Tony Carter is going to be preaching. Tony surrendered to preach, some months ago, and this is going to be his first go at it to preach. But as I said last week, his Sunday school class says he preaches every Sunday. So we're just going to hear him church-wide tonight. So come and bring a friend, and we'll celebrate together as he speaks. Luke chapter 9 this morning. Luke chapter 9. Last week we were walking with Christ, and as we walked with him, we listened as Simon Peter confessed that he was the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. And now in verse 28 it says that it came to pass about 8 days later. Now we don't know what took place in those 8 days. There are 8 days that go by. And as those days go by, he's taking Peter, John, and James, and he goes up into a mountain to pray. And so we're going to walk with him this morning. We're going to visit with him 4 areas. We're going to go up on the mountain first, beginning in verse 28. And it says, as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glistering. And behold, there talked with him 2 men, which were Moses and Elijah, which appeared in glory and spake of his decease, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. But Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they were awake, they saw his glory, and the 2 men that stood with him. It came to pass, as they departed from him, Peter said unto Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. While he thus spake, there came a cloud that overshadowed them, and they feared as they had entered into the cloud. There came a voice out of the cloud, saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. When the voice was past, Jesus was found alone, and they kept it close, and told no man of those days any of those things which they had seen. So on the mountain, you see the disciples, Peter, James, and John, and they're in a time of prayer. A time of quietness, a time of just being alone with the Savior. Now these disciples, I'm sure, are very tired, they're very weary, been very busy with the Lord, and so they decide it's going to be nap time, and they fall asleep. Now look at some of the details that begin to happen when they wake up. What did they see? Have you ever thought about that? What did they see when they woke up? They didn't know what was taking place, and so when they wake up, they see the splendor of the Messiah. And the light that they saw was the same kind of light that blinded Paul on the road to Damascus. And secondly, they saw the splendor of these 2 men, Moses and Elijah. You have Moses, who is the great lawgiver of the Old Testament that gave the 10 Commandments and led the children of Israel. And then you have Elijah, who reforming prophet of the Old Testament. Now, when you think about, you've got Jesus, Peter, James, and John, you've got Moses and Elijah. Now, you folks that like to go to Bible conferences, that would have been a Bible conference, wouldn't it? What a tremendous, tremendous time of fellowship those people must have had up on that mountaintop. Moses with the law, Elijah with the prophet, Jesus as he is, just preaching and teaching and ministering. Elijah who had delivered people out of bondage and, of course, talked about the false gods of his day. And then Jesus talks about dying. He gets into that in just a moment. Now, what did they say? What did they say? You see that in verse 33. Peter had something to say. He always had something to say. And so Peter blurts out, Lord, it's just so good for us to be up here on this mountain. And while we're up here on this mountain, why don't we make some tabernacles? One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. We don't want to forget all of this experience that we've had. We want it to continue. But that is not to be. And there's no record that Jesus even responded to what Simon Peter was trying to say. He just sort of passes it by. But then, what did they hear? Verses 34 through 36. A cloud of glory comes over them. And from that cloud of glory they hear this voice, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." This is my Son. Now, Matthew's account of that, when he writes about what took place on the mountaintop, it says that they fell to the ground terrified of this great voice that they heard. So now we've been on the locality of the mountain. Let's come down to the valley, at the foot of the mountain, beginning in verse 37. And as you come down off the mountain with him, you're going to meet, first of all, a heartbroken father, beginning in verse 37. It came to pass that on the next day, when they were come down from the hill, much people met him. Behold, a man of the company cried out, saying, Master, I beseech thee, look upon my son, for he's my only child. And lo, a spirit taketh him, and he suddenly crieth out, and it teareth him, that he foameth again, and bruising him hardly, departed from him. And I besought thy disciples to cast him out, and they could not. And Jesus answering said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you, and suffer you? Bring thy son hither. And he was yet a coming, the devil threw him down and tore him, and Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, and healed the child, and delivered him again to his father. The heartbroken father. Jesus, help me. Help my son. He's my only child. And look at what is taking place in his life. You can just hear this conversation as he's talking to Jesus, and then you see the helpless son in verse 36. Twisted, deformed, wallowing on the ground, distorted. He's having a terrible time. A terrible time, filled with a mean, evil demon. And then, of course, you see the helpless disciples in verse 40. I brought them to your disciples, and they couldn't help us. I brought them to where they were, and they could not. They failed to help my boy. They failed. You go back and you read where Jesus gave his disciples power. He gave them authority. He did that in chapter 9, verse 1. Now, what happened? What happened was they had a lack of faith. Their faith was weak at this point. Now, beloved, let me tell you something this morning. No matter what your spiritual gift may be, and most of you have a spiritual gift that God has given to you, but whatever that may be, the exercise of that gift is not always automatic. You have to have faith. And these men at this particular time, the faith was not with them. They somehow failed at this point. So Jesus rebukes the demon, casts the demon out, and the boy goes back to his father. And he took those disciples aside for a moment. And as he takes them aside, we move from the mountain to the valley, and now we're going to go along the highway with him. They were all amazed in verse 43 at the mighty power of God. But while they wondered, every one at all these things which Jesus did, he said to his disciples, Let these sayings sink down into your ears, for the Son of Man shall be delivered into the hands of men. They understood not the saying, and it was hid from them, that they perceived it not, and they feared to ask him of that saying. Then there arose a reasoning among them, which of them should be the greatest. Jesus, perceiving the thought of their heart, took a child and set him by him, said unto them, Whosoever shall receive this child in my name receiveth me, and whosoever shall receive me receives him that sent me. For he that is least among you all, the same shall be great. Jesus said unto him, Forbid him not, for he that is not against us, as far as I've mentioned, verse 40, I failed to mention that. John answered and said, Master, we saw one casting out devils in your name. And we forbade him, because he doesn't follow with us. Now, on the highway, he's beginning to talk about his suffering. He tells his disciples that I'm going to die. Men are going to kill me. Men are going to come against me. I'm going to suffer and I'm going to die. And they did not welcome that information. They did not want to hear